Hi everyone, welcome to chapter 3, which is about perception. I found chapter 3 quite challenging, to be honest. I've tackled it several times. So don't be afraid to go back to it again and again. There's a lot to take in chapter 3. So chapter 3 is about perception. Perception is not just a passive receiving of data from the senses. Perception is a lot more than that. It's deeply subjective and individual. It's partially a learned skill, perception. It becomes tuned by the environment. It's also built into us biologically through millions of years of evolution, and it's inherently connected to action. Perception is both bottom up and top down. So there's going to be a lot of returning to those themes, bottom up and top down, as we go through it. Perception is the experience that we have because of the stimulation of our senses. It is a process, not an event, and it is definitely tied into action. It changes over time as well as we get more information, which is linked to movement. Part of how we perceive more accurately is by moving. Okay, so they always think that human perception is unique, and then they do lots of nasty experiments on animals to find out about it. Artificial intelligence is interesting because some things work and some things don't, and that teaches us more about what human perception is and how it works. There are still insurmountable problems. Well, with the AI revolution happening now in 2023, this information is already starting to get dated. Okay, so there's 3 reasons why machines can't perceive like living beings. 1, the inverse projection problem. This is because we first outwardly project a little template of what we're looking for, of identifying what is it we are seeing. Like, it's easy for me to identify this as a hand. For a machine, it's far more difficult. It can't tell what's the foreground and what's the background. So there's an inverse projection problem. Okay, objects can be hidden or blurred. It's easy for a human to see that behind me there is a plant. For a machine, that is very difficult to identify as a plant. Objects look different from different viewpoints. Again, it's easy for us to identify this as a pen. Very difficult for a highlighter. Very difficult for a machine to do the same job. Which is why you have those little boring, horrible click the pictures that include, because they're actually using you as free labor for machine learning when you're doing that for your identity validation. Okay, so the human perceptual system uses 2 types of information. Firstly, environmental energy, which stimulates the sensory receptors. Secondly, knowledge and expectations that the observer brings. So perception is not like this passive input. It is a cognitive process. So let's start with bottom up. Bottom up, perception comes from stimuli in the environment. Parts are identified and put together and then taken further up the cognitive pathway in the brain. Okay, that's direct perception theories. A good example is pain. Okay, constructive perception theories. Top-down processing. It originates in the brain, the higher part of the cognitive process of the perceptual system. You actively construct perceptions using information based on expectations. If you are looking for a line and you see a curved tan shape in the distance, you go, line in the grass. the complexity of perception. Bottom up starts with the senses, incoming raw data, energy is registered on the receptors. Top down starts in the brain, knowledge, experience, expectations. Two examples of top-down processing is in language. We know when one word ends and another begins. Okay, AI can now do this, which is why you can transcribe your speech. Transitional probabilities. In a specific language, knowing which sound will follow another in a word. Bottom-up perception of pain. However, even bottom-up perceptions, for example, pain, are influenced by what you expect, how you direct your attention, and distracting stimuli present. For example, this tattoo was painless because the artist was applying deep pressure at the same time, and that hijacked the pathway so that my body felt it as a soothing massage-like experience, and the pain on the skin was a peripheral sensation. Without that pressure, I'm sure it would have been a very painful experience with just the skin pain going on. Okay, so let's start looking at some of the heuristics and built-in perception processes. Helmholtz's unconscious inference. We are not aware that we are inferring, but when we look at A with a blue rectangle in front of the orange, we perceive that we're probably looking at a blue rectangle and an orange rectangle. We do not expect to see a blue rectangle and an irregular orange shape behind it. Okay. This is a top-down theory, and it's based on likelihood and unconscious inferences based on our past experiences. Perceptual organization. Okay, so structuralism involved adding up a collection of qualities. Gestalt principles is what people think in terms of now. Gestalt principles, grouping patterns according to intrinsic laws of perceptual organization. So it's less about red and black, rectangle, shiny, plastic, solid, and more about the following. Here are 5 examples. Number 1, good continuation. The principle of good continuation. Lines tend to be seen as following the smoothest path. So we see this rope as one rope. Number 2, principle of similarity. Similar things appear grouped together. So if you look at where they are all red, you could see them diagonally, horizontally, vertically, or as a block. If you look at B, your mind immediately puts it into verticals. Blue, red, blue, red. The principle of similarity. Okay. Similarity of color causing grouping. Okay, there's 2 things creating this optical illusion. One is similarity of color, and the other is good continuation. If you look specifically at the line of the surf, you can see good continuation happening there. Perception is determined by the structure of our retina and the neural pathways from the retina into the brain. So we're organizing dark and light stimuli. And this is kind of a built-in way of organizing what we're seeing, okay? The role of experience is less important than the intrinsic built-in principles that we're basically born with. Experience can influence perception, but it's not the key driver. So we are pre-programmed for common physical properties of the environment here on planet Earth. Number one, the oblique effect. We perceive verticals and horizontals more easily than we perceive diagonals. And this is because there are more verticals and horizontals found in nature. Number two, we assume that light comes from above because this is what we see in our environment. We perceive shadows based on that intrinsic heuristic and assumption to give us information about depth and distance. So let's look at some examples. If you look at this natural environment, you can see that it is mainly verticals and horizontals. Here, if you look at the sand, you can see that your eye knows that A are indentations. Turn the photo upside down and what you see is mounds because your eye expects light to come from above. Regularities of the environment. Okay, so we do also perceive what we expect to see. You expect to see a plant behind me, not an extraterrestrial. So you will not perceive an extraterrestrial so easily as you will perceive the expected plant. Okay, now we come to Bayesian inferences. One's estimate of the probability of a given outcome is influenced by two factors. One, prior probability. Two, likelihood. For example, if I'm coughing, you already know that coughing is most likely caused by colds or by a lung disease. You also know that, okay, the prior is that you know that colds and heartburn are common, but in terms of likelihood, you know that heartburn is not going to cause coughing. It's very unlikely. And that it's more likely to be lung disease or a cold. So therefore, you take those two layers of assessment and you come to the conclusion that a cold is more probable and more likely than the other two options. So you come to probably a very sensible conclusion. Okay, the four concepts of object perception. Unconscious inference. Okay, that's like that light comes from above. Unconscious inference, hang on. Environmental regularities, for example, light comes from above. Bayesian inference, remember probability and likelihood. So unconscious inference would be the Helmholtz unconscious inference that shapes would be simple and as expected based on experience. Two rectangles, remember, that's based on experience. Unconscious inference is based on experience. Environmental regularities, light comes from above. There are more horizontals and verticals than diagonals. Bayesian inference, likelihood and probability. So that's 1, 2, 3. Those are all top down, 3 top down. One bottom up is Gestalt principles. I thought light from above was a Gestalt principle. Moving on. Neurons, knowledge, and the environment. Okay, so we train our neurons through experience. For example, horizontals and verticals. Our brains are plastic according to our experience. The brain changes its structure according to what you experience. When you learn something new, the physical neurons in your brain change. And when you forget things, they also change. Okay. Perception and action are intrinsically connected. When you reach for something, when you perceive something and you reach for something, it's coordinated in your brain so that you can do so successfully. Location, what is it? Where is it? In order to perceive something clearly, we move to get a more accurate perception. Okay, let's look at two pathways, the what pathway and the where. What is it? What is its identity? That's in the lower part of the brain, the ventral part of the brain. Is it a snake or a rope? Where is it? Location, dorsal pathway here in the frontal lobe. It's a frontal parietal, we'll see in a moment. Okay, temporal lobe is where the what pathway is, and parietal is where the where pathway is. Both of these go from the visual cortex, which would be the occipital, remember? So one would go to the temporal lobe for what? Snake, right? The other would go to the where pathway in the parietal for where? Left, right. Okay, another heuristic on this is the Ebbinghaus illusion. A small blue circle surrounded by larger circles looks smaller compared to the same circle surrounded by smaller circles. And so if you look at, okay, so there's a finger, compare it to the hand, okay, now compare it to the pinky. It looks smaller compared to the hand and bigger compared to the pinky. Quite a lot more hard to perceive with such complex information. It's much easier to see with a line. Oh well. Okay, and that is that. So good luck. I hope that helps and that it was useful. So see you in chapter 5.